Hello, I'm Iskatu Mask. We'll be going into part 2 of what I learned in Naraka. In the part 1, we talked a lot about technical shit. We gave a nice disclaimer that pretty much everything I know, everything I'm going to be discussing, and most of why I do what I do or why I'm trying to learn what I learn is because of performance. Because most of the game just doesn't work well for me. And this is kind of just mostly self-taught. Dale Deer coached me a little bit, and I've chatted with a few high-level players. But most people are pretty keen on keeping what they know a secret. At least in NA, and presumably EU as well, because I haven't seen too much. I mean, most of the tutorials I've seen come out, or the guides or whatever, are from EU and EU players. But they also tend to, again, they tend to focus a lot on technical stuff. They tend to talk about, like, you know, for example, you have the long notes video on spacing, which that's where I learned about the invisible collision. It kind of like confirmed some stuff that I suspected. It doesn't really talk about the logic of how you use it, the theory, so to say. And in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about theory. I'm going to talk about neutrals and theory, because this is a shit that nobody's ever taught me. Nobody's ever made a video for, at least in English-speaking world that I have found so far. I think recently there was that Ink K dude that translated some CN stuff related to this subject, but still, it was very technical and not very helpful. Technical stuff has limited usefulness for me because I'm running usually around 100, 120, 140 FPS tops. And my ping goes anywhere from 70 to 85 or higher. Again, training very deceptive because that ping indicator is tied to your FPS. And nobody even really knows if that's actually the netcode running through the game thread, which it should never be doing, or if the ping indicator in-game is just incredibly wrong. Now, there is a way you can kind of get a bead on this to an extent, which is you can use something like Wireshark or Task Manager even, and you can take a look at the IP addresses related to the game when you actually connect to a game lobby and go into it. And then you can ping those IP addresses. I have done that. Now, I have gotten a consistent like 65, 70 to each of those IP addresses. But this is definitely not actually the case when you're in the game. So I suspect that the netcode does actually go through the game thread because 28.4 Entertainment has not really exhibited any form of competence in the rest of the game's construction. So all this has a knock-on effect on the rest of how you interact with the game, and that definitely comes down to the logic of how you deal with neutrals and how you interact with another character. And most of what you do, for example, being able to dodge out of that parry, being able to parry at a distance relatively safely and having good timing for that, being able to spam parry, being able to react parry. Some things you just are not going to be able to react parry against anyways because the collision comes out too fast, and it depends on your weapons. And that's a really important one I want to talk about right there, because that one's very, very relevant. Which is the react parry, the late parry, and the parry that it looks like you should have gotten it, but you didn't. Because actually, the parry timings in this tend to be quite tight. If you watch the NBPL, you're going to see that a lot. You're going to see a dude parry, and he's going to get hit generally after the red flash ends. That's sort of normally how it's supposed to work. But, well, we all know from experience that is absolutely not the case. Absolutely not the case. Where there are plenty of very, very, very late parries. I've had parries that have happened a full second or two after. I've had parries hit attacks that were finished And I have seen that exact same bug happen to therein, who has triple, quadruple my FPS and is what, like 40 ms, 50 ms tops. Where the particularly the dual blades horizontal blue, it seems quite capable of being parried after the attack has ended. It has happened both in high ping and low ping situations, and I've seen it happen to a variety of people. You can be hit by this blue, and then you can get a parry out of it. So there is a lot of very jank things in mind, and that's going to formulate how you begin to build the foundation of your neutrals. So what exactly is neutrals? Neutrals is the interaction of you and the player character. And the foundation to understanding neutrals is not just about understanding what makes, you know, for staggers and shit like that, but from what makes a dangerous combo, what actually leads into something like a TOD. What is something, maybe you don't want to use your skill. Understanding that you can parry from a laying down, you can parry from being prone, and it's much faster to do that than it is to recover and then parry, which can be the difference between you getting the parry or not. So let's let him knock me down. I can parry from a prone position. Now, if I try to move and then parry, not only am I not in the right position, I got hit by that follow-up blue. However, depending on the weapon, you may not even want to get up at all. Because if you get up right away, you can be locked into another catch. So, I made a number of videos on this game at this point, talking exclusively about my experiences learning it. And I haven't really gotten too in-depth into talking about the actual neutral theory I've been trying to learn. That's the main reason why I decided to record these videos. The first video talked a lot about the technical stuff. I wanted to start laying the foundations, at least to get into the neutrals thing, because the neutrals thing is where the real, like, fuck is. Because, again, nobody's ever taught me this shit. Anytime I ask about this shit, I get blank stares. Nobody knows. Rather, they do know, they just don't want to tell you, because this game is about gatekeeping. So I'm going to tell you everything I know to the best extent that I can. I'm not the right person for the job. I ain't good at it, but I'm going to try to tell you what I know. And a lot of this stuff I've only very recently started to pick up on after nearly 3 years of playing this game. I've played this game for a long fucking time. I've got 1,800 or more hours into it. The people that I'm playing against have like 8 times, 10 times the amount of games that I have. And they very much enjoy you not knowing anything. So, one of the things that Nebula always told me was that I play unsafe. And I still don't really understand what that means, because when I asked him to elaborate, he did not. Nebula was not very keen on actually explaining the vast majority of things. Immortal, on the other hand, was actually quite helpful. I think Immortal has answered pretty much every question I've thrown his way. For example, I've asked him, you know, what was like the main thing that I could do better, because I played a lot of customs with him too. And he said throwing blues at a distance. Now, remember in the first video, I talked about the whole spacing thing where you want to be outside of it and you want your parry collision to go into it, right? Now, the same is true when you start to formulate what exactly constitutes as an untrue combo, what constitutes as a true combo. And throwing the blues at a distance allows you to make that spacing a lot more easily. But that isn't always possible because the collision distance of weapons, especially specific weapons, is so much higher than you think it is. And one of the problems with performance difference that you do not get on CN is that on the end of the laggy player, like my end, especially weapons like the longsword, You seem to get caught by this at an absolutely insane distance. An insane distance. And you can't forget getting FPS dipped into animations that shouldn't hit you. Notice how the white ghost of the iframe activation starts up and then I get snapped into a hit anyways. Now this is part due to the collision, but when we're in training, it does not look that bad. But there are catches that we get hit with that are fucking nuts. Longsword is one of them. I will talk about the parasol, by the way. That's a new weapon. It wasn't out when I was making my first video. Longsword is one of them. The dual blades is the other one, where you can get, it seems that you'll get hit by this at an absolutely crazy distance. It happens with me in lab all the time. Now, because it's so desynced, because I'm so laggy, you get hit with this obviously before the attack even really comes out. Right? You can't really trust the animations. You can't follow the animations. You have to be thinking in a headspace that you are behind time. Because they are server authoritative. There is no synchronization whatsoever. You are always behind on the animations. Everything always happens in the past for you. Which means that when they suddenly fly up, and this attack moves very fast, they're gonna get catches on you all the fucking time. And your gut instinct is gonna be like, holy shit, I got hit. Time to use my skill to get out. Right? But not every catch is equal. So you have to know, and it's different for every weapon, you have to know what catch equates to what. And this is also gonna be different for the players. I've got some recordings, I played some customs early in the morning, like at 2 a.m. with Lab and some other dudes. Moku was coaching this Xbox player. And this Xbox player is, he's only played trios. And I think he said he played for like 2 years or something. I'm pretty sure that's what he said. And he's like Formless or Infinite Nirvana or something like that. So he's like top rank in trios. But he's on Xbox and he's at a major disadvantage. I think his FPS and ping is actually very similar to mine from what it sounded like. It's kind of hard to hear him because he was so quiet. But his neutrals and everything like that really weren't as strong. But as we were playing with him, it was clear that he was, you know, catching up and figuring stuff out. And then by the end of that, he was very close to my level. So he closed that gap within the span of like an hour. And then you go to Lab. And Lab is really the excuse I want to use for not all catches are equal. Lab has been the player I've been playing against in customs for a while now. Like I said, my children got me. I quit this game. I quit early in the year because I was playing solos and everybody else I knew quit. And solos is like the least enjoyable experience I've ever had in video games, period. It is so fucking bad. And that's in large part because of my performance. I would probably, in spite of the stuff like the TODs and the class imbalances and stuff like that, I would probably enjoy this game a lot more if I had good performance. The only people I see that actually like solos in this game are people that have 40 MS or lower and 250 FPS or higher. Because they can actually interact with the game. And a lot of the interaction comes down to them abusing people like me. That's why, again, there's a lot of gatekeeping, is because they want to feel like that they mean something, right? So there's a lot of people that want to have that and hang on to that advantage as much as possible. That's why you see a lot of people that say this game is not popular because it has no marketing, and it has nothing to do with marketing at all. This game has tons of marketing. It was on the front page of Steam the other day. Nobody plays it still. Why? Because it requires an X3D, and it requires you to have 40 MS or lower to start to be competitive. Ideally around Immortals level, around 20 MS. That's what it was built for. So you go in, and you're getting hit by this shit from a fucking mile away before it even animates and comes close to you. You get locked up. You can't move. Your animations for being staggered do not reflect how long you're actually out of loss of control. If you watch his feet, he tends to sink or slide around because the animations for this game are so poorly done. It feels jank and it feels awful to play. And every time you get hit, your first instinct is to use your combo break and then get out of it. But again, not every hit is equal. And that's one of the main things that I kind of like noticed by watching Lab play, specifically when playing against Lab. And of course by watching the NBPL and stuff like that. This is something I inferred, of course, from watching many other things, is you want to hold on to your cooldowns. I'm on Sarah. When I use this is 24-second cooldown. That's a really long fucking time. And not every escape is equal either. Plenty of times you can catch Sarah coming out of her F, and the combos will continue, and you won't escape. And then there's, like I mentioned, there's times you get knocked on the ground, and then you try to get up, and you're just caught in a combo again. And that happens with me in Lab over and over and over again. Like, I've been able to beat him. There's times I've been able to beat him several times in a row, and it almost looks like I know what I'm doing. Most of our fights do not look like that. Most of our fights do not look like that at all. And I try to figure out, okay, so why don't most of my fights look like that against him? Well, the reason actually is because of muscle memory. It's precisely exactly what Immortal and Hypernova and Dildir and stuff like that. Now, when it comes to Immortal, I can't tell you if this guy's cheating or not because I'm not at his performance point. What I can tell you is that the main person who accused him of cheating is in the STR guild. And the STR guild organizes teaming in quick match, and we've run into that. So I feel like if this guy's guild has members in it that will willfully group up against people in quick match, and that's how they play the game, and they consider that acceptable and don't kick these people out of their guild, then I honestly don't give a shit about anything they say. Period. Couldn't really care. That doesn't hold any weight to me. But I notice that anytime you talk about Immortal, people talk about cheating because they're convinced that this dude's cheating. And I was initially at first when I watched it because some of the stuff he seems looks pretty unbelievable, like skill rushing really fast. But then you realize, wait a second. This guy's running at 600 plus FPS on 20 MS. How are you going to tell this dude is cheating unless you are running at the exact same performance? How? How are you going to tell? Maybe he is. How are you going to tell? You can't tell. And you don't need to worry about this one dude, because every single fucking person you're going to run into in ranked is going to feel like they're cheating to you. Every single one. At my performance point, every single person is hitting me with this shit from a mile away, long before the weapon attack actually comes out, and it's coming out so fucking fast you can't react. And when you watch my games against Lab, what? But you were attacking! The people I have not been able to win against are the people that have super major performance difference, but they also have very strong neutrals. That is Hypernova, Endless Tears, and some of the other people who are not high ranked on the leaderboard, but I can tell you for a fact they have extremely strong technical skills. Heist or whatever his name is, that's another one that I've never even gotten close to killing. And a lot of that is because I'll get hit from something like this out of a mile away. I will attempt to disengage, and I'll get immediately caught again. And then it's into the TOD, and that's it. It's very much the same thing that happens with Lab. Over and over and over and over again. But not every hit is equal. Because not every hit can lead to that TOD, which means you want to save your cooldowns, you want to save your strategy. There is another element to this as well, which is terrain. This is something of a more complex thing, so I'll talk more about it later. But remember how I've mentioned that customs players tend to really struggle in survival when they just live in customs? One of the biggest reasons for that is terrain. They like to sit on flat terrain where they can do their cute little TODs. Or they can coast you down a fixed ramp in Celestra and do their cute little TODs. That's all they do. They practice quick time events. Terrain in this, as I mentioned in the first recording, it fucks up a lot of blues. Much less TODs, because now the float timers are different. Sometimes you won't be able to coast them at all. Sometimes you get hooked on things. There's things they can scale rush off of. There's more escape options. What? What the? Okay. I think you iframed the second one. I don't know what happened to the first one.
The first one, I think it was probably terrain, I guess.
Yeah, there's like a slight elevation.
Wait, he's right here! Oh no!
He sucked. What was that? He sucked my soft plug.
Me too.
No. Wait, we're getting 1v2'd.
What?
Terrain. Terrain is extremely valuable in this game. I would say that this game is a lot like Brood War in that sense, where terrain is very valuable. A lot of games don't have terrain, or the terrain doesn't really impact that much. Naraka is not one of those games. Terrain is very, very important in Naraka, which means that when you get into practicing in this, don't just sit inside Celestra customs. Don't sit inside Yang customs. Those don't reflect the actual game. Do the other customs maps. That's what Mucky was doing with me as we were going through all the different customs maps. It changes a lot more than you might think it does. What the fuck? But I'm not going to talk extensively about that because I don't really have a lot of sample material to show for it, and it's kind of hard to really talk about it, but I'll talk about more about that later. But what I wanted to bring up with that is that not every hit is equal. For example, we set the bot to the combos training here, and if I try to uppercut this dude off of the vertical, you can get the catch off of that super long distance dash vertical off the dual blades, but you cannot combo off of it. You can't turn this into an uppercut, grapple, whatever. You can't do that. The only one you can do that is the horizontal, which at my ping is not even true anyways. It's very, very hard to get it because of how inconsistent it is. I'm right at the threshold where some of those grapple blues turns into an actual true combo like it should be, and some of them don't. For example, the nunchucks, which every time I look at the icon, that looks like a pair of penises. This is one of the ones I've been trying to do. But it's true for just about everybody else I play up against, except for me, because I'm just at the threshold where it doesn't animate fast enough. So every bot can escape it, and at least 70% of the players can escape it. So if your performance point is looking like mine, even the grapple bump combos, the most basic combos in the game, don't necessarily be true in some weapons. Nunchucks, I think, is the absolute worst. But the key thing to remember on your end is not everything turns into a combo like that. Now, when it comes to this combo, I think you can 2-1-1 or a crouch cancel into a hung sword or maybe a katana, and that can possibly become a combo. I used to be able to do this a little bit. I was starting to practice it, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm still not sure if it's actually true or not. Yeah, so I need If I'm going to do that weapon swap, it has to be a horizontal. So not even that is true. So keep in mind, when you see these people like weapon swapping out and shit like that, they're doing it to maximize damage numbers by a little bit or to set up a TOD, but not every initiator is still going to be true. Which means that if you get hit by this, you don't necessarily want to burn your skill to escape it. You want to hang on to that skill. One of the key things that happens in a fighting game like BlazBlue, which has the burst ability that lets you escape. It's your combo breaker, and that goes between matches. That's a resource. And sometimes you want to hang on to that resource. For example, if you're very, very low, it may not be worth consuming that resource. If you have a lot of health, it also may not be worth getting that resource. Because let's say, for example, I start getting comboed in a corner, and that can lead to a TOD on a longsword. But some weapons, like the staff, it's a little easier to get out of at super close distances, and it's a lot harder to make a combo out of them, because the basic combo for the staff looks like this. Right? And turns out you need a lot of space for that. Now, I think... Oh, the grapple? LOL? I don't know why that didn't launch him. I think they changed it because you because of that combo that you should be able to grapple bump or at least blue this. Most people are going to do what is called a 2-1-1 or a 9-8. What is it? 9-8-5 weapon swap. I don't know how to do that. I can't show you it. I practiced that for 30-40 hours. I was able to pull it off a single time. The inputs for that are way too much. And I've read that you need at least 250 FPS to do it at least reliably. And around 200 FPS to do it at all. Here's an interesting tidbit. Before we get too much deeper into this, I'm talking about FPS. Base hit, uppercut. You can't use the vertical until you're back on the ground. Dash into right, and he gets up again. If I take off the user interface, so the core of this is that the vertical hit on the ground staggers them, and you are allowed to lift them off the ground. You can even do this at my ping. Actually, the big limiting factor of this combo is FPS. But ping definitely influences it. So against a bot, it's not really gonna work. But I have managed to do it in customs against lab a single time. It's very, very difficult to do, however. In part because by the time my vertical comes out, the bot or the player has hit the ground most of the time. That's not going to happen. I so happen to have a recording of Lab doing this to show Lynn how to do it. I want you to compare the air timers and animation timings between our recordings. So this is one that definitely needs a lot of practice. But this is the bread and butter TOD for flying knives. What makes this possible is the fact that when the opponent is on the ground, you can hit them with the vertical and it resets their combo. Which means that you can now lift them back up in the air again. And you just loop that. which is surprisingly difficult when you're like me. Dumb. But it's also more difficult when you do not get much airtime, right? So not everyone is capable of doing this combo. Just the vast majority of players you run into in solos. Versus, say for example, the katana, where if I knock you in the air, I might get a blue out of it, right? They get slightly ahead of you and then start coasting you with air attacks. That does not contain the same lethality of the longsword joggle, where people are able to go into a double uppercut, carousel, plus other shit, or infinite you against a wall. That's going to be the most dangerous. Or you could do what Lab does with Volda, where he uses his F skill to create what is basically a TOD by bouncing you between the balls.
Only out of it, it still respands you. Oh.
氷は九州を封じ、雪は敵を葬る。まだその時ではありませんね。油断しました。
As you can see, not every catch is equal, and not every weapon is as lethal as the others. So that's kind of like one of the key things before you even really get into the whole neutrals thing is understanding what kind of lethality stuff carries. Because you're going to get caught. No matter how well you play, you're eventually going to get caught by something. And knowing what your response to that should be is very important. If we are dancing and I manage to catch you with this, you might be tempted to skill out immediately. But that would be a mistake, because once that resource is gone, then if I catch you again, especially with a horizontal, yeah. And that blue follow-up, and a lot of 1-2-3s, unless you have crazy ping, it's basically unavoidable. You can't react them like you can a bot. That's the other thing. Neutrals is like 50% psychology, 50% bullshit. And the bullshit comes from the unreliability of the game's netcode and the FPS. At an even skill level, you'll see a lot more psychology. But at an even performance point that's at a good performance point, that's when the game starts to shine, at least until you start getting into the combos. Once you start hitting combos, the game becomes very boring. But until that point, you got a lot of people kind of like bouncing back and forth, holding blue, waiting for the other person to do something. They're either going to try to throw that blue, and they're going to try to parry to catch a blue, which is considered very risky, by the way. Or they are going to half charge into a white, and they're going to try to catch something. Or they're just going to dive in and try to catch and then dash out. Now, when Nebula told me to play blue, I believe what he is trying to insinuate is to try to stop going for half charge catches. Do not try to go in and out. Do not try to needle in and grab a catch. Because if your ping is too high, like mine, if your FPS is too low, like mine, you open yourself up for way larger of a window of getting caught than you think. And what I found when I played against Nebula and then now Lab, especially since Lab upgraded his hardware, he wasn't nearly as good as he was back then. Back then, he was not very good. He was good enough that he could consistently beat me, yes, but now that he has upgraded his system substantially, and now that he's actually learned to play on that performance, the difference is absolutely astronomical. Which means that there are times where I will try to do something, I will try to blue, I'll try to get a catch, I'll try to dodge, and he will have staggered me before the animation looks like it's even beginning to end. It's one of those things that makes you think, wow, this guy is hacking. How does he get that catch? It's fucking crazy. Dude, this bullshit. He just catches me out of fucking nowhere. Instantly. It seems like an absolute frame perfect. It looks like a tool-assisted endeavor. But actually, I don't think Lab's reflexes are actually really that high. Because I've noticed that when there are times that I do things differently. I managed to do things differently that breaks my predictability with him. It can cause his brain to kind of shut down for a moment. And he will get confused, and he will default back to playing what I think is considered very safe. And then no longer does he try to fish for those catches anymore. And there are times where I can out-reflex him. It's very hard to do with the performance difference. But I don't think that reflexes alone are why he gets those catches. I believe it really does just come down to muscle memory. And this is why I started this particular discussion talking about being on the floor and recovery. Because wake up is a very big deal in BlazBlue. I read a lot about it. Because if you are on the ground, you can be caught coming out of your wake up. That's why in BlazBlue, there are so many different wake ups. Right? And so I robbed him out of his F. That's fucking hilarious. And if you know the timings, you can catch the instant they come out of the wake up. And if you know the timings on the blue and you have good performance, you can do that. You can get out of the blue as it starts. And that just seems kind of like bullshit. Now, the bullshit is when it doesn't work. The bullshit is when you go up against a player and you're getting hit by blues and shit that you should have iframes for. Because then the whole game falls apart and it's no longer reliable anymore. So that's when we enter some very strange things. For example, let's see if what he's doing is not knocking me on the ground. So he gets me on the ground again. So what I've noticed, this is what I noticed Nebula doing a lot. When I played against him, one of the things that really stood out to me is he stays on the ground a lot longer than he needs to. That happened a lot. I would knock him down and he would just fucking sit there. And then I saw Lab doing it. And you want to know why they do that? I figured it out. It took a while, but I realized there's a reason why they're not using their wake-ups right away. And that is because how many people go for that wake-up catch, that it is muscle memory for them to go in for that wake-up catch the second they come off. They have that timing hammered into muscle memory. And that is what Lab is consistently hitting me with, is he has a muscle memory for all these recoveries. Coming out of dodges, when you're going to use the dodge, and if you get knocked on the ground, your first instinct is to get back up. So in his muscle memory is, I've got him knocked down on the ground, I hold my attack into a half charge, and then I just catch him as he comes up, and then boom, you're in another combo. And there is well more than half of your health. So if you're laying on the ground, a lot of horizontal attacks can't hit you. Same if you're crouching. Now some can, and some that look like they should. I wish I could set the bot's weapon, by the way. Yeah, see, that'll go over your head, but the follow-up blue will not. So there is a lot of memorizing what attacks in this game can hit you in what state, because not all of them are equal. And just because you're on the ground doesn't mean you're safe against certain things. For example, a lot of the times I notice, or if I feel like Lab is going to just sit on the ground like that, I know I can just go for a hit off of a vertical. The problem is, that hit off of the vertical is not true. Which means he can actually catch me out of that because his frame rate is so high. A lot of the times when I get a hit on him with a vertical, since it's not true, he can instantly turn around and start a combo on me. That is an interaction I haven't been figuring out how to navigate yet. That is like the most advanced interactions of neutrals I've so far run into, and I don't know how to break that particular interaction. I should have it in some of my recordings that I'm showing you now. You can see these weird catches that he gets out of attacks that I try to do, and it feels like he shouldn't be able to do that. While I can do dash white, the third is not true. Now, there's no difference between them. There's nothing that indicates to you they're not true. So what constitutes as soft and true in this game is kind of complicated and annoying. Kind of like how restands, which is basically a way to reset a combo, are supposed to be not true. As you can see, the bot attempted to dodge out of that, but it was not able to. That time it was. Now, soft trues and restands and stuff like that, I'm not good enough to show you how to do those because I actually don't know how Mucky does the Viper one, but a lot of the times you can't like dodge out of them, but you can use a skill to get out of them that is not a combo breaker, or certain ultimates. For example, Tessa's ult can sometimes get you out of a certain combo, certain soft combos that a dodge can't get you out of. Certain skills, particularly Vipers or Zippings, are great for masking fuck-ups in your neutrals that could see you get punished. But I'll discuss skills in a later video. There's a dagger combo I've been getting hit by that is a 3-hit white combo. And I think it's supposed to be horizontal and a crouch horizontal, but it's not true. So I actually don't know what that is. I've asked a couple times what it is and no one's told me, so. All right, so something else I will talk a little bit about is ranged weapon usage theory. Now, I had a few people tell me about the whole distances and spacing thing in terms of like how distant stuff is, where it's like, you know, at a certain distance you want to use ranged weapons or whatever. No one has ever explained to me the actual theory of using ranged weapons. Because when you're shooting someone, they can just grapple you and stagger you, and then you're locked in a combo, and then you die. And that's that. I think aiming lets you avoid grapple stagger. But I hate the aiming in this game. It feels really awkward, like there's mouse acceleration or something. It's just not raw input like it should be. None of the game's mouse controls feel very good to me, even though I've played around with the settings and so on. It doesn't really matter. So there's other things than just shooting at a distance though and trying not to be grappled. Of course, you can use the dodge to cancel it, but then you might just run out of stamina like I do, and then when someone runs up to you, you don't have a way to get away from them. But there's other bits and pieces too. Again, one of the things that Lab showed me is that if you hold a charge on a melee weapon, hit crouch and mouse wheel, you'll swap over. Now for the pistol, that'll charge it. So you actually want to just release after you've swapped. The interesting thing that I've noticed some people doing, which is risky, but it kind of like pulls off the basis of like, we expect people to do something, so we're going to do something in the expectation they do something. For example, you might see someone go in for a 1-2, and they might expect you to do a 1-2-3, which would then be a parry because the 3 is not true. So I think someone might actually go for that parry. What they instead do, 1, 2, and then pistol shot and swap back. 1, 2, pistol shot and swap back. So if you think the other player is going to dodge or parry or something like that when you're going for that, you might be able to swap in a quick pistol shot on top of it. And of course, as I mentioned in the first video, when you knock people down, if they're sitting on the ground, you can get a couple quick shots off. Of course, with the other weapons, if you've paid attention to where the head goes, there are fixed directions. You can get headshots. while they're on the ground.
正確に命中せよ
As you can see, generally speaking, that head direction is going to be fairly consistent based on the kind of knockdown. Right?
正確に命
But
中せよ
aiming in this game is a fuckfest. But if you really do think someone is going to go for that parry, you can swap that. For example, a very common thing to do with the pole sword and greatsword is to horizontal into a vertical for that blue. So a lot of people are going to see that charge, especially if you hold it, and they're going to try to parry that. Which means
光の導き
you do have to be a little quick with your fingers, because if you're charging the vertical, that's not going to work with the rifle or the other weapons, right? You'll have to do something like this. Right? Incidentally, if someone repair dodges away, you might be able to catch them with a headshot when they come out of it. The weird thing about projectiles in this game is that they're destroyed by melee attacks. So if someone is shooting you at a distance, but you don't want to get close to them, you don't really have a real way to get around, you can just throw attacks around and projectiles can't hit you while you're attacking. This includes ballistas as well. What it does not work, I don't know if it works with a flamethrower, but I wanted to mention the flamethrower anyways because it's kind of a special weapon. The flamethrower is just a projectile weapon. It shoots a bunch of tiny projectiles that have deceptively huge fucking collision at an insane distance. And it will pop things like jellyfish at a massive distance. Now you notice when you hit people with it, they'll start burning, but that burning debuff has a cooldown for when it can be applied again. One hit is not going to set off that burning debuff. So you need a couple of hits to throw that onto them. I believe the burning debuff applies a damage reduction nerf, like a debuff, but I'm not 100% sure. I read about that, but I don't know if it actually does that. But this is a very nice support weapon in teams because of the AoE effect, because it's consistent, so even if you don't get a lot of hits, you can stop them from healing. The debuff does like a 50% healing debuff. It's not huge, but it can be a big deal. Especially in later zones, later shadow zones, if people go into the zone and you flamethrower them and they take a debuff, they take a lot of damage from the zone, they take a lot of damage from the fire, and they pretty much can't heal out of it. Even if they're a character like zipping. So, very nice to have. The other thing about ranged weapons in particular, this is pretty basic stuff, but Shale's shield is not typically affected by ranged weapons unless they stagger her. For example, headshots off of the bow will stagger her and trigger the ultimate. Things like the flamethrower do not. So even like a purple quality flamethrower is very nice to have on hand, especially in team modes where there is a lot of Shale. She's extremely powerful and they just keep buffing her because 24 Entertainment employs the Riot/Blizzard balancing strategy, which is to not attempt to balance anything whatsoever. So you're gonna run into this character a lot and she is an absolute pain in the ass. So you better get used to using ranged weapons. All of the ranged weapons are very, very strong. The repeating crossbow is probably considered the weakest, but just between you and me, I've gotten a number of kills off of this because it still does headshots. And if you're very, very high latency or you have a very hard time hitting the other weapons, you can finish off people with this at a distance. I've killed people in customs, I've killed people in regular games. It can do damage.
Who the hell gave me a chicken? What the?
Beware, if someone is actually capable of putting in the inputs, they may actually be capable of swapping and parrying you out of their ranged weapon. So if you're trying to round up and blue someone who is spamming a ranged weapon, you may get punked by that. You may get punked a lot. The dual flintlocks is very, very similar in theory. In practice, the repeating crossbow only has one jade, which is not very good. And the flintlocks have several jades, some of which can make it do quite a bit of damage. There are some differences between the ranged weapons. For example, if you're trying to do these swaps, the flamethrower may not be the best thing to whip out because it's kind of slow to dodge in and out of. Same with the cannon. So you probably don't want to be using that in close range if someone's really close to you because it's really going to slow you down. Repeating crossbow evidently has a burst shot to it, so depending on the distance, maybe you can get a couple of hits on it, especially if you're good at aiming it, but probably not the ideal weapon to use. Now, you might be wondering, what about the flying knives and the fan and stuff like that? Aren't those ranged weapons too? The answer is no, they're not. That's why you can parry them, because they just make a model that moves out. They do not spawn a projectile. Do not think of them as ranged weapons. They are not. The flying knives, throwing knife thing here is its own distinct thing that can be deflected with melee attacks, but that's just a clash. It's a special behavior. But it is not a projectile like the conventional ranged weapons are, and therefore can be parried. While aiming the ranged weapons is extremely difficult, the most difficult part about them is actually remembering to use them at all. Even a lot of high-level players will forget to use ranged weapons, especially in survival. Especially in survival. You see it a lot in customs because that's literally all they're doing. But I noticed a lot in survival, even very high-level players will commonly forget to bring out their ranged weapons, except for very specific periods. And yet, one thing you'll notice within the NBPL is, especially towards the end circles, just about every single person, especially in trios, will try to have a cannon. Now, this is not just because of the fact that cannon is better at hitting groups of targets, but because of the jade that it has, which is going to be the one that causes fire damage. Of course, you got to hit it a few times. This can hit behind Yang pillars, and a lot of things in the game cannot hit if you don't have line of sight between the origin bone, which is at the root of your character, 000, and their origin. So if you're trying to attack someone through a wall, you traditionally can't hit them behind there with most attacks. But this also applies to a lot of small geometry like fences and stuff like that, which is why you can't hit people behind fences, trees, and other things, even though it looks like your weapon collision should go behind it. Some of the damage spawned by weapons such as a cannon are exempt to that, and even if you are running full defense jades, you can still do some burn damage with the Rupture Gale Orb, which again is going to cause that healing debuff. It's not nearly as powerful as you might think it is, but it is still something that can cause a significant difference, especially when it comes to certain jades, certain defensive jades, that cause healing, namely the Vulpine Essence and Mortal Defiance. These are nerfed by the fire debuff and by the healing debuff that comes out of the zone. In fact, there was a video I just released very recently. It was when I think it was a trios game that I casted from Lab and Azura and Lin, where Lab had Mortal Defiance and it popped under the zone and it didn't heal him for shit all. So that's going to depend on the strength of the zone, I think, because the healing debuff is not that much in like zone 1 or 2, but later on it becomes more significant. You can't heal through it, and that includes those jades, and the burning debuff does apply to it as well. So you're going to see a lot of people using Rupture Gale Orb, especially in higher end team games. It is still useful in solos. Again, you can shoot people in Yang with this, and when they hide behind the pillars, it's a little safer so long as you know they're not, close enough to scale rush you when you can't see them, or have an ability or something like that they can use, like Justina's ultimate, that might catch up to you when you swap out. So the cannon is not as good. It's got a long delay that kind of prohibits you from crouch canceling out of it, so spamming it's not really that useful for the duels. But if you can hit them, like if they're not spamming attacks, if they're stunned or if they're hiding or healing or whatever, the damage of the cannon can be quite nice to have. And if you're not stacked on attack jades and it's not doing much damage, the fire can still help you out a little bit. The key thing, of course, is remembering to actually use it. Remembering to actually use the ranged weapons is so much harder than it sounds, because so much of the training and so much of the games depends on doing stuff in melee. So you don't often think to use the ranged weapons except for when you're up against bots or in specific circumstances or whatever. But then it comes to actual scenarios where you're trying to chase someone. Maybe you can get a ranged attack out and finish them off instead of having to chase them around. Or maybe someone is being extra difficult to get close to and maybe just get a little bit of ranged. Or you're having a hard time following your ally in a team game and you can't really quite get in, or you're worried about screwing up their combo. Maybe you can just swap to a ranged weapon and help them out that way. The main way that I practice using the ranged weapons is just in bot games, where there's no pressure and you don't really care if you die. So you can try some extra things. Just think, maybe I'll just do a little bit of damage, swap back and forth on a ranged weapon, and figure out what kind of rotation really seems to work well. But when it comes to close combat theory with the ranged weapon, you're going to see a lot in higher level, where because of the player's low ping and high FPS, swapping in and out comes even quicker. But even at my performance point, you can take advantage of how the ranged weapons behave and how you can swap between them when you actually understand the timings. The biggest issue, of course, is that they can iframe it, they can roll out of it. Not every recovery is equal. It is going to cost you some stamina to be spamming it and swapping out. But it's one of those things to keep in mind that ranged weapons have been nerfed repeatedly in this game and remain incredibly powerful. And again, I am going to talk about jades and stuff in the future, but one of the things I want to mention about ranged weapon jades in particular is actually going to be Armor Pierce. Armor Pierce is an extremely powerful jade because it ignores armor. Go figure. And when you throw in something like Slow Shot, which I find very difficult to use, I've never been able to use this, but that's damage directly to health, right? Now, when I stack attack jades, let's just grab a whole bunch of meteor here. Now I'm doing 600 damage directly to their health bar, which, yes, that will kill them. That will kill. This is not something you see very often, even though it is extremely powerful. I did watch one game with Lab doing solos. Lab was doing something, I don't remember what he was doing, and he suddenly got hit out of nowhere with a headshot that did like 600, 800 damage or something like that. And now he has no health. He had full armor and everything like that, and then the opponent started chasing him. And something you can do is you can grapple the stagger and throw in some shots. When the stagger stops them, there's definitely going to be better inputs than what I'm doing. I don't understand the inputs in this. There's being like grapple, jump to cancel, and then shoot. Meanwhile, every single shot is doing health damage. And he was already really low. So he had no real way to heal. All he could really try to do is attack and jump around and try to dodge. Meanwhile, this dude is grapple spamming, just shooting. And eventually he dies. Eventually it finally hits him and kills him. And he had no way to get pressure back because he had such little health that any screw up and any hit would have killed him. And eventually, it took a little while, but eventually that's what happened. So Armor Pierce is a particular one to watch out for with the musket. Because with Slow Shot, 800 damage directly to your health is very, very significant. especially if you not really rocking a lot of our damage reduction jades. And headshots from the bow and the musket are one of the reasons why people spam crouch and wiggle around when healing, because you're quite vulnerable during this process, so any little bit of motion helps to try to prevent people from finishing you off. Another thing you'll often see people do is wiggle around back and forth during the process of using shops or looting bodies. This is for the same reason. They will kind of jerk back and forth or do a little circle or something like that. All that is just to try to make it slightly more difficult for someone to get a surprise headshot on them. When you have high ping and low FPS, Naraka travels far more quickly than you might think, because so much of the animations are basically getting skipped, and you're basically losing time. A high FPS player like Lab sees the game travel in what perceptibly looks like a slower frame rate. Additionally, things don't work for you that look like they should, like the double uppercut commonly snapping people to the ground. Furthermore, a lot of parries constantly get robbed. Since so much of Naraka commonly relies upon decision-making and speed and reflexes to form the neutral's foundation, when you have a performance disadvantage like mine, even other players with similar performance disadvantages don't necessarily even the field. It often just becomes extremely inconsistent. Therefore, trying to formulate a winning strategy and how to win the game often leads to you doing certain things because they continually work, whereas other options that should be available don't work. But you still require intimate knowledge of the game. You need to know all of the distances that can be acceptable for making parries. The new parasol weapon is immensely powerful and has crazy extra collision when parrying, amongst the highest in the game as far as I can tell. This allows me to make parries with it that I never could make with any other weapon. The problem is that, parasol or not, I still only get 1 out of 10 parries at the best of times. Naraka requires a significant different mindset than what I learned within League of Legends, Halo PC, Unreal Tournament, Brood War, and so many others at a high level of play. Many Naraka fights end in something as simple as just spamming the vertical blue on the whipsword over and over and over again, then holding to bait out the parry and getting one more hit to finish the fight. This is against a player that has tremendously better technical skills than I do. I am just simply abusing psychology. It doesn't always work, but it can work. And that's what makes games like Naraka have a very significant skill ceiling. Because each player is different, and even when you take out performance and interaction concepts, Neutrals is a game that there is no real easy way to solve. Some of the high-level players like Hypernova and many of the CN players have de facto solved it, but they can still be caught off guard. It's just very difficult to do so, and impossible to do so if you're at a performance disadvantage. Since there is only 1 or 2 NA players that can really be considered good at this game, we may as well discard the notion of high-level professional play and treat all interactions within this particular discussion as being generally equal in terms of skill and performance. So we can look ahead at many examples I have recorded here and analyze them a little bit more in depth to understand what my neutrals theory looks like at present time. Casper told me that the most important thing to him is figuring out an opponent's ping and FPS. This then dictates how he can interact with that player, and what he's looking for in regards to what is parryable and what isn't. Dildo told me that he has a checklist of things he goes through to figure out what he works on the player, effectively doing a knowledge check on them, perhaps playing more safely or defensively, in the words of Nebula, during this process. So what we learn by interacting with the different players and interacting with the neutrals in our own manner for the last near 3 years is that neutrals is a guessing game, but it is also something that has a degree of solvability to it. What makes it solvable, however, is an interaction layer. And that interaction layer, I believe, is the nebulous so-called safe play that Nebula suggested. I believe that consistency in Naraka is established by so-called safe play. And since consistency is so extremely important to measuring any degree of improvement, establishing some sensibility of grounding through safe play is critical to actually making improvements within Naraka, and probably similar fighting games such as BlazBlue. Through Lab's various connections, I have met a handful of players that are much closer to my skill set than he is. They all have better technical skills than I do, and they all outperform me, but not to the extent that he does. This has allowed me to gain some degree of measurement and averaging of sorts between how I perform versus him and how I perform against them. This is because most of these players are relatively consistent, and by playing against them for quite a while, I have been able to feel out the inconsistencies within their gameplay. However, I'm still not quite at the point where I understand where my own inconsistencies show up. But I do know that there is one thing I've been able to capitalize a little bit on, primarily using the parasol. In fact, the parasol kind of symbolizes a lot of the interactions in the game, because it is not a weapon that has been solved yet. It's not at the stage of whipsword or flying knives where everybody's got TODs going for them. The parasol, therefore, is a lot more about neutrals and mind games. And neutrals and mind games is also the domain of heavy weapons like the pullsword and greatsword, as well as the fan and dagger, although the dagger is actually my worst weapon, and the worst weapon to fight against for me. The biggest technical difference between players like Lab and then players like Jesse or Moku is that while they have better combos, they don't have the same combos that Lab does, which means you usually get a couple of extra chances to try to beat them, whereas against Lab, if you screw up once, it's usually going to be half, if not your entire health pool, depending on which weapon he's using. There's two particular problems I need to overcome. One is the performance anxiety of actual games, but it's not really the same thing as performance anxiety. But it is something that I have already discussed. It's the problem of when people play customs and then bring those skills into survival. For me, it's a little bit bigger of an issue than that though. It's not the customs in themselves that cause me problems. While indeed translating that skill set into an actual game is difficult because I'm usually more nervous, the reality is that I have a much higher stress in an actual game than I do with playing people that at least I'm somewhat comfortable with. It's not that I mind dying, it's that I'm socially awkward. It's not like anybody ever communicates to me. I have only had a single person cry to me after I killed him in Immortal War, and that's it for the entirety of the time I've played the game. I've had a couple of people like Creamy add me to their friends, and then there was Envy, a teenager that embarrassed himself in a very, very silly and amusing manner, and that's kind of about it. Is there really anything to be stressed out about? No, I stress myself out. Because I want to perform well, and when I get instantly killed by every single person on contact, that makes me more and more frustrated. The things I should know, I can't apply to the game well, and that happens in customs too, but perhaps for a different reason. I am extremely inconsistent. The reason why I wanted to talk about things like neutral theory, things like catches and dodges, the heavy weapons and so on, even though these are far from the first things I was introduced to when I started this game, is because I want to establish that framework that leads us to this particular discussion. Consistency. Consistency is the single most important thing in anything within life. Consistent scheduling, consistent mindset, consistent work, consistent dedication, focus, motivation, so on. Everywhere in life, everything is consistent. Consistency is the bread and butter of dependency and reliability. And you can only really start to measure your progress within something if you can be consistent. One thing I noticed about this console player is that when we first started fighting him, he really had no idea what to do about a lot of the things I was going to do, especially with the parasol. He would try to parry from too far away, he'd open himself up, he would sometimes use various skill in a manner that even I could iframe it because of how easy it was to avoid. But as you've already seen in the earlier clips, he actually shaped up quite well with a very short amount of time. That's because his gameplay was very consistent, and he was able to isolate things he was struggling with. The main things I noticed that he could have worked a little bit on is changing his blue timings. When I realized he was going to continue to throw fairly fast blues, I was able to predict them quite well, and despite the fact that both of us had very high ping and I was flat out unable to parry his nunchucks at all, I basically was able to figure out his katana quite reliably, for very similar reasons despite that.
Tentacles.
Naraka is a pseudo-turn-based game. When someone gains the initiative on someone and gains their turn, they basically are going to dictate the flow of the fight, because they're either ahead in the blue charge, because they're trying to catch something, or because they are initiating in some other manner, for example using a skill. However, those turns can change depending on a few different factors. It shows up more at the higher level you're at, because when you're in a true combo and you don't have an ability to break out of it, then you will not get your turn for prolonged periods of time, and the fights generally are going to be solved in 1 or 2 or 3 interactions at the absolute maximum. At low level Naraka, which is a lot of what we see here, to mid to high level, we're not going to see that nearly as often. Each battle is going to be a series of failures, sometimes a series of very, very fast consecutive failures. It's particularly when we're interacting with Lab, and he's using something like the longsword, staff, or spear, that we're going to see things that basically amount to the vast majority of solos interactions I have within this game. Which means that not only do you need to make the right decisions every single time, you also need to make sure that even if you don't have the same kind of combos that they do, you put yourself in a position to deny them access to your turn. And that's not very easy when they can catch you out of every single thing. What it means is that every single input you put in must be decisive, it must be intentional. Controlling button spam is one of the most important things you can learn within a game like this. It's not like League or Brood War, where you can continually throw and move inputs and work on your APM to keep your hands warm and keep your mind in the game. That does not work within this, and the habits that I've developed to do that, to keep my mind in the game, especially over long periods of time, are extremely detrimental to Naraka, and are one of the reasons why I struggle a lot. Not just because I sometimes end up with the wrong inputs here or there, but because the mindset behind them makes it more difficult for me to actually focus on what's going on. This is one of the reasons why I'm finding success with the Parasol, and one of the reasons why I'm finding some success with the heavy weapons, because it's forcing me to pace things out. When the game starts accelerating and players like Lab play at such an accelerated speed due to their ping, FPS, and their general muscle memory, that's when I start to get really, really unhinged. And I think that's in large part what exposes the inconsistency of my play, because I have a hard time ramping up that thought process, and it starts dragging me back into the way my mindset was developed for those other products. Which means that now I'm not really thinking about each individual input as much anymore. I'm just sort of panicking and desperately trying to get my turn back. But it doesn't work like that. No matter how fast or how hard you push the buttons, you're not going to get your turn back, and what little opportunity there exists to do so is something that has to be capitalized decisively when it presents itself, should it present itself. Naraka is, after all, a game about touch of death. Most of the time you are not going to get your turn back, so you have to prevent them from getting access to it to begin with. And this is before you get into things like the slap meta. Despite numerous nerfs, the slap remains one of the most powerful weapons in the game. You can't parry a slap, you can hop in and out of it at will, and it generally sets you up for a true combo depending on the ping and FPS of your opponent. It is extraordinarily powerful, and a lot of the high-level players, in NBPL and otherwise, are going to just whip it out of nowhere, and sometimes consecutively, which means you have to be constantly ready for it. It can be used to intercept attacks, to get clashes out, and to prevent you from getting access to wide attacks. There's a lot of things to keep track of in Naraka, which is one of the things that makes keeping up with the pace of it as it accelerates very difficult. If you have an ability to slow down the pace of the fight through some manner, this can help you realign yourself and get back your turn, or at least get back some degree of understanding of what's going on. But how would you do that? Holding blues is one way, by forcing someone to try to respect it, but if you don't get access to the blues, then it's very hard to do so. A lot of players at high level will just choose to dodge away from you using repair dodge or the double dash. Whatever the case may be, this can allow you to slow down the fight a little bit and try to realign yourself. If you have access to it, just holding the blue can be a way to try to measure yourself out and get your feet back on the ground. However, if you choose to go fast, this can also be useful, because if you've been going slow up until that point in the fight, you can catch people off guard. One of the things to keep note of is that even high-level players can crack under pressure. If you're a player that scales well to the length of a game like I do, then slowing it down, even if it may not be particularly beneficial to your game flow, this could still give you advantages in the long run. Some people get very impatient and will try to finish a fight quickly if they feel like it's taking too long. This allows them to do things that cause them to be more unsafe. Perhaps this is where some of Nebula's advice is hidden. We can see some of these interactions with Lab, perhaps by sheer happenstance, but it allowed me to gain some victories I have never gotten within the history of playing this game. When I first started doing customs with Lab, I was often doing some fairly high-speed fighting. But now I'm only doing high-speed stuff with the Parasol because I'm knowledge-checking the shit out of him. As he gets more and more accustomed to fighting the weapon, that doesn't really work. Historically, I have not had good fist weapon play against him. But while studying my recordings, I did notice this particular fight was highly unlike the others. Not simply because I would switch between high and slow speed, but also because I was able to avoid Volda's spears. This is one of the only times I have ever managed to beat a Volda through her ultimate without some circumstance playing into it. Whatever circumstances there are behind this fight, this is an incredibly important fight to watch, especially for me, because there's so many parts of it that are so critical to my general interactions with this game. From the very first days I started trying to do ranked, Volda has been an incessant problem for me. Volda is also the main of Nebula, and her ultimate gave me incessant issues. Volda was also a main of Immortal for a while, and that was also an absolute nightmare to deal with. But I didn't need top players to cause me constant problems with her. It was everybody in the entire game, even beginner console players. Being able to avoid her ult is something I have spent 2 years trying to train, and only now have I been able to go up against her and not get completely trolled by it. Before, I could only ask to avoid 1 or 2 spears. Sure, Lab was a little predictable with them, but I was keeping track of her cooldowns in my head. That's the recipe to success, and I used Justina's ultimate to mask my own neutral weaknesses and to keep the pressure up. This perhaps made Lab feel a little cornered. I don't get victories like this often against anyone. That's something I consider very important. I find that when I struggle against a character in a game, be it League or anything like that, what I do, and what works best well, is I play that character, at least just in bot matches. Within the last couple months, I've picked up Volda and I've played her a handful of times. I did play her a couple of times prior in quick match, but this time I started bringing her into bot games, I started bringing her into quick match trios, I just roll her every now and then. I'm probably never really going to be good at her, and I'm never really going to play her that much. But learning how she works, getting accustomed to the animations, and perhaps most importantly at all, understanding the mindset of what makes her kit work, and when you want to make it work. What is the recipe that makes her succeed, and what is the recipe that makes it not succeed? That's important for playing against her. And the same goes with weapons as well. I can't formulate a comprehensive discussion on neutrals all in one go, because despite the massive amount of hours I have in this game, I still barely understand how neutrals in this game work at all, and that's just from a beginner standpoint. Whether it's new players or experienced players, I find them all a little bit of a struggle to deal with. It's true I can identify weaknesses in people's skill sets and ways that they can improve, but that isn't necessarily something that helps me with my own consistency. But I feel like when it comes to trying to instruct people on how I learn this game and how I try to train this game, these are the most important things to discuss first, before I even get into things about talking about the characters and weapons and jades and so on. much less things like team play and those experiences, because those are extremely complicated, and having a foundation to work off of in terms of examples and discussions is incredibly important. And for that, I will conclude part 2 of this series.